Christmas morning in Portland was quiet in a way only snow can make it. Outside, thick white flakes had blanketed the porch, muffling the sound of the world. Inside, the house buzzed with the ritual hum of familiarity. The scent of cinnamon rolls drifted from the kitchen, overbaked at the edges just like every year. A fire crackled in the hearth, though the thermostat was set too high for it to matter. The Christmas tree blinked from the corner with tired lights, the same ones my mother insisted on using since I was 12. I stood by the window with a mug of coffee half warm and wholly forgotten watching the frost trace delicate lines against the glass. Everything was exactly as I remembered. That was part of the problem. My sister Sophie floated into the room in a cashmere lounge set, hairstyled just enough to look effortless. She carried herself like someone used to applause. My parents beamed as she entered, their eyes lit up in that way parents do when their favorite child walks in. "Close your eyes," Mom whispered, barely containing her excitement. Sophie giggled and covered her eyes like a child. Dad handed her a small box wrapped in deep green paper with a white silk ribbon. She squealed before she even opened it. She always had a flair for timing. Inside was a single silver house key. I didn't react. Not because I wasn't surprised, but because I had known somehow that this morning would hold something I was not invited to celebrate. Sophie gasped, pressing her hand to her chest, already tearing up. "It's yours," Mom said, her voice catching. "The condo on Hawthorne, we bought it for you." Sophie let out a breathless, "Oh my God," and fell into both their arms, tears and laughter mixing into the same sound. Dad kissed her on the forehead, then they turned to me. Mom held out an envelope. No wrapping, no ribbon. Just a plain white envelope with my name in her handwriting. She didn't say much, only this. "You'll understand someday," she said softly. I took it with a nod, no smile. The envelope was light, too light. It rested in my lap like something meant to weigh more. I didn't open it. Not right away. The room buzzed with celebration, but I sat silent, folding the envelope between my hands. I already understood. Not the why, not fully, but the pattern. And something inside me shifted. I looked at my parents still wrapped in Sophie's glow, and I knew this time I wouldn't leave quietly. Not again. Not after everything they'd done without asking. Not after what they had taken under the assumption I wouldn't notice. Not after what I had discovered just 2 nights before. My name is Emily Carson. I'm 34 years old, live alone in a rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn, and work as a senior book editor for a mid-sized publishing house. I read for a living, which is another way of saying I spend most of my days sorting through voices that aren't mine. The irony doesn't escape me. My parents, Martha and Henry Carson, live in Portland, Oregon, in the same craftsman-style home they bought when I was 8. My sister Sophie, 5 years younger than me, never really left. She lives about 20 minutes away and visits often, usually unannounced, usually in activewear, and usually carrying some new branding idea or project update that requires attention and applause. Sophie is an interior content creator. She runs a YouTube channel called Sophie Space, where she teaches people how to make small spaces feel bigger using neutral tones and baskets. She has partnerships with 3 homeware brands, a modest but loyal following, and an online persona curated to perfection. My mother calls her a visionary. When I published my first book, Mom told me the cover looked a little plain. Dad is retired now, though he still wears slacks to check the mail and trims the hedges with a ruler. He doesn't say much, never has. His love language has always been logistics. He fixed our broken appliances, paid bills, early labeled leftovers with the date and contents. Affection for him was a task completed. And yet somehow, when it came to Sophie, he softened. He smiled more. He allowed messes. I remember being 9 and spilling orange juice on the kitchen counter. He made me clean it twice. When Sophie spilled glitter on the carpet, he took a photo of her being creative. I used to think it was me. That maybe I was difficult, colder, less lovable. But I've worked in publishing long enough to know the problem isn't always the character, it's the narrative. My mother Martha is the kind of woman who sends handwritten cards for every holiday. Even Arbor Day. She used to be a ballet teacher, ran a small dance studio out of our garage until Sophie was born. She's elegant composed, carries herself like someone who still moves to music no one else hears. She's also exacting. Everything has its place. Appearances matter. When Sophie launched her brand, Mom printed business cards for her even before Sophie asked. When I was promoted to senior editor, Mom asked if that meant I'd finally move back home. I didn't. I haven't. I've lived in New York since college, worked my way through internships and ramen dinners, learned to navigate a city that doesn't slow down for anyone. I like my solitude. I like the space I've carved out. But this year, after 2 Christmases away, I came home. Not because I missed them, because Mom left 3 voicemails in 1 week. Her voice was sweet and trembling, mentioned her hip, something about not being able to lift the tree box on her own. How it would mean the world if I came. Guilt is a powerful motivator, especially when disguised as nostalgia. I said yes, packed 2 sweaters and a book I never opened, and flew across the country to sit on a couch that still smelled like our childhood dog. I expected the usual. Awkward silences, polite questions about my job, Sophie dominating every conversation. What I didn't expect was to sit in that living room wrapped in the smell of overcooked cinnamon and pine-scented candles and be handed an envelope like it was a utility bill. What I didn't expect was to feel 17 again, invisible again, forgotten again. I held the envelope in my lap and looked at the 3 people who shared my name and realized that somewhere along the way they had stopped seeing me as someone who needed anything at all. I had become self-sufficient, and in doing so, I had made it easy for them to ignore me. Sophie was the star, the project, the purpose. I was the one who figured things out, the one who called her own cab from the airport, the one who booked her own doctor appointments, the one who edited her own life until it was small enough not to bother anyone. And they let me. They encouraged it. Because it was convenient. Because it made room for Sophie's spotlight to stretch. I think that's what hurt the most. Not the favoritism itself, but the confidence with which they delivered it like it was a family tradition they had no intention of breaking. The first time I noticed the imbalance, I was 8. It was the morning of my birthday. I woke up early, still in my pajamas, full of the kind of wide-eyed excitement only children have. I tiptoed downstairs expecting balloons, maybe a card, or at least the smell of pancakes. Instead, I found the kitchen empty, dim, and cold. My mother was in the adjacent room, brushing Sophie's hair for a dress rehearsal. Sophie was 4. She had a tutu on and a plastic tiara that sparkled under the morning sun. I stood quietly in the doorway, waiting to be noticed, and when Mom finally looked up, she gave a small smile and said, "Oh, honey, we'll do cake tonight." "Okay, Sophie has her recital today." That evening, we had cupcakes, store-bought, the kind with too much frosting and sprinkles that tasted like chalk. Sophie got to blow out the candle. She thought it was her celebration too, and Mom didn't correct her. That was the first birthday I remember feeling like an afterthought. It wouldn't be the last. In middle school, I joined the science club. I loved it. I stayed late after school building circuits and testing small projects. One day, I won 2nd place at a regional competition for designing a water filtration prototype. I came home, medal still warm around my neck, excited to tell someone. Sophie was in the living room with a neighbor doing a live video on how to decorate mason jars for spring. Mom asked me to keep the noise down so Sophie could record. I hung the medal on my doorknob. No one ever asked what it was for. Years later, when I graduated with honors from college, I stood on the stage, scanning the crowd. I had sent invitations. I had even offered to help with flights and accommodations. They didn't come. Sophie had just signed a small brand deal and needed help setting up her new studio. I got a text from Mom that said, "So proud of you. Post photos when you can." I did. They didn't comment on any of them. When I moved to New York, I worked 3 jobs to afford rent. I called home once a week at first, then once a month. Eventually, I stopped calling altogether. Not out of anger, just survival. Every conversation circled back to Sophie. Her views, her collaborations, her plans for a book she never wrote. Dad once asked me if I had thought of starting a blog too, just for fun. When I said no, he shrugged and said, "You were always the serious one." He didn't mean it as a compliment. The last time I visited before this Christmas was 3 years ago. It was Easter. Sophie had just hit 100,000 subscribers and decided to throw a brunch. She wore pastel pink made lavender scones and printed personalized menus. Mom wept with pride. Dad gave a toast. I brought a bottle of wine and was asked to take photos. Every time I look back, I try to find one moment where the roles could have reversed, where I was the one in the center, where Sophie clapped for me, where Mom said, "This is your moment." I can't find it. Not because it never happened. Maybe it did once in a way I missed, but because every memory is wrapped in Sophie's voice, her laughter, her presence, and my quiet effort to not be in the way. Even when I succeeded, when I published books, when I edited bestsellers, when I was offered a speaking slot at a literary conference, the response was always the same: polite interest, distant pride, conditional support. I learned early how to celebrate alone. I learned not to expect candles or applause. I told myself I didn't need it, that it was better this way, cleaner, less complicated. But the truth is, when love is always measured and metered, you start to question whether it's real at all, whether you earned it or were just convenient. Sophie needed. I managed. That was the difference. And they treated that difference like destiny. I don't blame Sophie entirely. It's not her fault she was chosen. She was simply open about her needs, generous with her emotions, easy to comfort. I was sharp-edged, reserved, more comfortable in silence. But love isn't supposed to reward performance. It's supposed to recognize presence. And I had been present for years, quietly, constantly, unseen. 2 nights before Christmas morning, I couldn't sleep. The guest room felt unfamiliar despite the framed childhood photos and a bookshelf still stacked with old paperbacks I'd outgrown. The mattress was softer than I remembered, but the silence was too complete. I got up barefoot, moving quietly through the hallway like I used to when sneaking out past curfew. The house hadn't changed. The same wood creaked under the same floorboards. The same thermostat clicked twice before restarting. I passed the den, the kitchen, the laundry room. Then I saw it. My father's office door slightly ajar. That more than anything was strange. Henry Carson doesn't leave doors ajar. He closes them fully, locks drawers, disables notifications. When we were kids, he treated that room like a vault. No one entered, not even Mom. I should have walked away, told myself it wasn't my business. But something stopped me. A small tug in my stomach, quiet but undeniable. A voice I hadn't listened to in years. I stepped inside. The light from the hallway spilled across his desk, revealing neat stacks of paper labeled folders and a mug that still held tea leaves in the bottom. It felt wrong to be there, but it also felt overdue. I moved slowly, careful not to leave marks. The safe was behind the file cabinet, just like it always had been, but the door was cracked open. I knelt, not touching anything at first, just looking. Inside were rows of manila envelopes precisely labeled. Tax returns, property deeds, investment portfolios. Some names were familiar, others weren't. Then I saw it. A folder labeled Carson Holdings, Emergency. I opened it half expecting nothing. Inside was a packet of documents. At the top, a deed. My name, Emily Jane Carson. Next to it, an address I didn't recognize. A condo on Hawthorne Street, purchased 3 years ago. The name on the buyer line was mine. The signature was not. I stared at it, heart pounding. The slant was off. The loop in the J too wide. The R looked foreign. I knew my signature. This wasn't it. I flipped the page. Mortgage statements, a trust account, authorization forms tied to my Social Security number, all signed. None by me. My fingers trembled. My breath caught. This wasn't negligence. This was intentional. I kept going. I found an internal memo from a financial advisor addressed to my father regarding the allocation of funds from Emily Carson's trust to support Sophie Media Ventures. I had never created a trust. I had never been told there was one. Yet here it was with account numbers and transfer details. The condo wasn't a gift to me. It had been collateral, used to secure a line of credit that funded Sophie's brand expansion. I sat on the floor, the papers spread around me, trying to connect the timeline. It all made sense. The sudden rebranding Sophie did 2 years ago, the studio upgrade, the new equipment, the 3-month European tour she took and documented. I had assumed she was making enough to fund it. I had no idea they used my name to secure it all. The next document was a notice of foreclosure. Payment overdue. The property was in default. The bank was preparing to reclaim it, but here was the twist. Attached was a note from my father scribbled in his precise print. Will resolve by January. Sophie's revenue projections strong. I stared at it until the letters blurred. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a story rewritten without my knowledge. My name had become a tool, my identity a convenience, and no one had thought to ask. I gathered the documents, folded them carefully, and placed them in my tote bag. I didn't take everything. Just enough. Enough to know I wasn't imagining it. Enough to prove I hadn't overreacted. Enough to act. Back in the guest room, I sat for hours, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality settle like dust. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger requires clarity. What I felt was something different. A hollowing. Like part of me had been scooped out without permission. The next morning, I called Maya, a friend from college who now worked as an estate lawyer in D.C. I didn't tell her everything. Just enough to get a read. I emailed scanned copies of the documents, then waited. She called back that evening. Her tone was professional, but I could hear the edge underneath. Emily, she said, if you wanted to pursue identity fraud, you'd have a solid case. I asked if there was another way. Something quieter. Clean. She paused, then said, There's always a way. Over the next 5 days, we worked in silence. Maya helped me establish an LLC under a neutral name. I transferred funds from my personal savings, used a legal proxy to submit an offer to the bank, and purchased the condo under Silent Elm Holdings. Everything was legitimate. Every form filed. Every box checked. I didn't tell my parents. Not yet. The irony, of course, was that I had rescued the very asset they used to leverage my name without consent. But this time it belonged to me. Not in theory. Not in trust. In deed. Once the paperwork was finalized, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Focused. Like I'd finally done something with all the silence I had swallowed over the years. The condo was legally mine, now registered under the LLC, hidden behind enough layers that even if they checked the public record, they wouldn't find my name. It wasn't about secrecy. It was about control, about reclaiming what they had taken without asking. I didn't want the condo. I didn't even want them to know I had it. Not yet. I wanted them to feel something else first. The pause before the truth lands. The space between assumption and recognition. I returned to the house the next morning like nothing had changed. Mom was in the kitchen making gingerbread cookies, humming slightly off-key. Dad was outside measuring the lawn for new winter fertilizer. Sophie was recording a tutorial about gift wrapping using recycled paper. Everything was the same. Perfectly, painfully the same. We went through the motions, decorating sugar cookies, watching holiday movies, pretending we were a family untouched by tension. But I saw things differently now. Every comment, every shared glance, every time Mom asked Sophie for advice on lighting or color schemes. I watched it all like a documentary, detached, analytical, and for the first time, I wasn't trying to win their attention. I wasn't waiting for a seat at the table. I was preparing to flip it. On Christmas Eve, I wrapped my gift. A plain white box, no ribbon, no glitter, no tag. Inside was a manila envelope sealed with a wax stamp. It contained 3 items. The new deed, a photocopy of the original mortgage document they had signed using my name, and a letter from Maya's office outlining the legal breach and the ownership transfer. It wasn't an attack. It was a mirror. I placed it under the tree tucked in the back, quiet and unassuming. I didn't need a dramatic reveal. I needed truth to arrive like it always does. Undeniable and on time. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No racing thoughts, no second guessing. I knew what I was doing wasn't cruel. It was necessary. A line drawn not in vengeance but in clarity. I wasn't here to destroy anything, just to stop pretending it wasn't broken. On Christmas morning, when Sophie unwrapped her designer bag and Mom cried, I waited. When Dad toasted to new beginnings, I waited. When it was finally my turn, I handed him the box gently like it might break. He opened it slowly, expecting nothing. Maybe socks, maybe a book. Certainly not what he found. As his eyes scanned the first page, I watched the muscles in his face tighten. His mouth pressed into a thin line. His hand trembled just slightly. Mom leaned over to look. She smiled at first, then saw the bolded words and froze. Sophie glanced up from her phone, confused. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The papers spoke loud enough. Mom's eyes moved across the page slowly at first, then faster, as if trying to catch a mistake before it became real. Her smile faded like breath on cold glass. She looked from the document to my father, her mouth opening slightly. You didn't tell me, she said. It wasn't a question. It landed like a dropped glass, sharp, final, impossible to undo. Dad didn't answer. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Sophie looked around the room, confused and clearly uncomfortable. What is this? She asked. No one responded. She asked again, louder this time. Can someone please tell me what's going on? I stood slowly, smoothed the hem of my sweater, and looked directly at them. It's exactly what it looks like, I said. My voice was calm, even not raised. I wasn't angry. I was certain. That was more dangerous. Mom took a step back from Dad as though space could soften what she had just learned. Her eyes flicked to me, then the documents, then back again. She looked older suddenly, like the room had aged her 10 years in a second. Emily, she started, but stopped. There was nothing she could say. Not now. Sophie sat down, clutching the designer bag she'd just unwrapped. It looked absurd in her lap now. She blinked rapidly, like she was trying to wake up from a dream that had turned too real too fast. Why would you do this? She whispered. Her voice cracked. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see the golden child or the performer. I saw someone unprepared, someone who had never once thought to question how things came to be in her favor. Because it was mine, I said simply, and you knew it wasn't yours. Sophie shook her head, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. The truth was in ink and signatures. I turned to my father. You used my name. I said my social security number, my credit, and you didn't think I'd ever find out. He still didn't speak, just stared at the document like he could will the words to change. Mom sank into the armchair, her hands trembling now. The silence in the room thickened, dense, heavy, like wet wool on skin. No one moved, no one apologized. They couldn't. Apologies would imply responsibility, and they had lived too long in a version of the story where I was the strong one, the capable one, the one who didn't need anything. I broke that story in half. I stepped back away from the tree, from the wrapping paper, from the broken rhythm of a holiday that had always excluded me. I picked up my coat, paused at the door. Not for drama, not for effect, just to see them really see them as they were now. Dad still staring at the page. Mom crumbling by inches. Sophie small for the first time. I opened the door and let the cold air pour in. It was sharp, honest, clean. I won't be giving it back. I said, my voice barely louder than the wind. Not the condo, not my name, not anymore. Then I walked out. By the time I reached my rental car, the snow had begun to fall again. Light at first, then thicker, steadier, until the road ahead looked like a blank page. I drove in silence, hands steady on the wheel, the documents locked in the glove compartment untouched. The house faded in my rearview mirror, swallowed by snow and shadow. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. For the first time in years, it felt like I could. Back in Brooklyn, I returned to my small apartment where nothing sparkled and nothing was new, but everything belonged to me. I placed my coat on its usual hook, turned on the kettle, and sat by the window as the city pulsed quietly beneath me. No texts came that day. No voicemails. No emails asking what I meant or why I had done what I did. The silence wasn't heavy. It was clean. A kind of quiet I hadn't known I needed. I didn't respond to anything that followed. I let the days pass. I watched the snow melt, then freeze again. I returned to my desk, to manuscripts, to stories that weren't mine. But something had shifted. A new steadiness, a line drawn. And I didn't step over it. Not once. Weeks later, Maya called just to check in. She asked if I wanted to keep the condo, sell it, rent it out. I told her I didn't know yet, that I wasn't in a hurry to decide. And I wasn't. The condo had never been the point. It was a symbol, a boundary made real, a line in ink that they could no longer cross without consequence. I visited it once a month later. The building was quiet, modest, well-maintained. I walked through the rooms, slowly touched the cold glass of the windows, the smooth tile of the countertops. I sat on the floor of the living room and let the emptiness settle around me. It wasn't a home, but it was mine. No performance, no pretense. Just a space no one else had shaped for me. I thought about donating it, maybe turning it into something useful for someone else who'd been taken for granted. I hadn't decided. I still haven't. But knowing I could decide was enough. That night, I returned home and opened my laptop. Not for work. For myself. I began to write again. Not an email, not a reply, not an explanation. Just a story. One without an apology at the end. I don't know if my parents will ever reach out again. I don't know if Sophie will ever understand what really happened. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. I no longer need them to. I no longer measure my worth in their recognition. I am not the quiet one anymore. I am the one who chose to speak not with volume, but with truth, the kind that doesn't ask to be heard, only to be known. And I know who I am now. That's enough.